And we are live here to chat about all the TV that we watched and didn't watch this week. What you missed off screen was Carey giving an example of how to be a male feminist, but much like unicorns, you never really can see it. That always happens behind the scenes, so you just will never know. But we are here to talk about Stranger Things and Only Murders in the Building and Thor. And it's just like there's a bunch of cool things, some of which I haven't watched, to be honest, some of which not all of us have watched. So this is going to be an educational experience throughout. But before we dive into that, do we have any news? And I already know the answer is yes, because Emmy nominations were announced this week. But let's do our little rotation here. And Kate, take it away. What news do we have for this week?
Okay, so I don't have the Emmy nominations, but what I do have is a reminder that this Friday, Persuasion is coming out. The mixed reviews have us cautiously optimistic, but we are ready to see it anyway.
Mixed reviews is an understatement.
Yeah, I'm trying to be positive here. And then another movie was announced recently called See How They Run. It's going to be out September 16th, and it's starring Saoirse Ronan, and it's like a 1950s murder mystery comedy. It kind of gave me like period drama meets Knives Out, and so it's very good.
Anything that gives me Knives Out vibes, I'm in. Anything that has Saoirse Ronan in, I'm in. And immediately, like I'm telling you, the first 5 seconds of the trailer, I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna love this. This is when you know, you know."
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm looking forward to that one especially. And that's all I have.
So, what did you guys think of the Emmy nominations? Any big snubs that you're upset about? Any categories where you're like really rooting for somebody? Did we ignore it entirely because the Emmys are invalid? Where are we at?
I just completely forgot they happened, so I have no idea.
That's so fair. Carey, what about you?
I would like to say that I was disappointed that like Superman and Lois didn't get any Emmy nods, but this year sort of it's been a roller coaster. So yeah, I'm not gonna die on that hill.
Right. I mean, you never really see like CW or whatever. What's the Freeform? I guess they're calling it whatever. You never really see those get nominated. And a good example of that was I saw somebody say, because Sydney Sweeney, who plays Cassie in Euphoria, and somebody I can't remember her name in White Lotus, which I think all of us watched White Lotus, right? Maybe not. If not, watch White Lotus. It's fantastic. Sydney Sweeney got nominated for both of those two series, and there was a tweet saying she's now the first person from Pretty Little Liars to get nominated for an Emmy. And it was like, because that was like the whole thing at the time. It's like Pretty Little Liars and shows like that never get nominated, but that's because these shows are biased against things that women, specifically young women, like. And the reason why Euphoria got nominated is because it is a show about young women and not designed to entertain or please or elevate young women. In this TED Talk, I'll shut up. So Stranger Things. We'll do another little rotation-y brew because you guys want to know a secret? You want to know something? Carey didn't watch Stranger Things, but he's gonna have to listen to it anyway. Let's get this out of the way first. Carey, you would like Stranger Things, and I know this from the bottom of my heart. I know this. Kate, back me
up. Yeah, it's just an accurate statement. I feel like if you watched the trailer, if you saw even just one episode, you'd understand our thesis without us having to go into it. But we will go into it anyway.
Oh yes.
Just for your own pure entertainment.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Stormy's in the chat. She says, hi, everyone. Other than Netflix, I have no streaming services, so I haven't seen most of the Emmy nominees. Well, Stormy, if you've got Netflix, I'm guessing you saw Stranger Things. Or if you're borrowing somebody else's Netflix, which is a much better approach, reduce, reuse, recycle, you know? She does say she's Abbott for Abbott Elementary. It's the only show that have Abbott Elementary got like sweeping nominations and deserved every single one. It is like the golden beacon of light in a television hellscape right now. I am so excited for it to go on for like 10 years and for everybody involved to become like the top paid actor in television and each one to immediately spin off and do a bunch of other shows that also get nominated for Emmys. So very excited about that. Stranger Things didn't get nominated. Spoilers. Only the first half of the latest season of Stranger Things was eligible for Emmy consideration, and there was one specific episode in the latest season, and Kate, tell me if you feel differently, that I really strongly felt would get one of the actresses, Sadie Sink, an Emmy nom, and that was episode number 4. What did you think of kind of in this latest season, sort of having certain isolated episodes that focused on one character?
I liked it because it's never, even this season, it's never like fully one character. You do switch back and forth, but they do this thing that I like in like Murders in the Building that they do, where they approached more thematically each episode, and it would typically focus on a character or a storyline, and little details and moments in the other storylines supported that theme. And I thought that was a really good job of making this very spread out story feel so much tighter, because it's one of the most, like, in practicality, disjointed, because there's so many characters in so many different locations not being able to talk to each other, which is so different from the previous seasons where they're all in the same city.
Mm-hmm. Throughout most of this season, I love the season. I think this is one of the strongest ones yet, but I was kind of annoyed with them having the cast all split into these groups. It wasn't me nitpicking who was in what group, to be honest with you. I enjoyed the team ups that we saw. I could sit here and say, oh, I wish we had more of, Joyce and Eleven in the same place at a time, or I wish we had more of, Robin getting to interact with some of the other kids, or, whatever the case may be. But I really enjoyed the groupings. I just didn't like, at the time of watching it the first time, I didn't like that they were all in separate places the entire season, where, for example, Joyce and Hopper are in Russia the entire time, and we have the California crew the entire time, and you pretty much don't get them mixed except for the very beginning, very end. But by the end of the season, and upon kind of rewatching some things, I realized that it's not so much that I like that, it's that this is the only time they could do that. Season 1 and 2, they're really establishing these characters and their crew. Season 3, they put them in like trippy fun time. Season 4 is the only time they're really going to get to split them up and have them go on their own journeys before we have season 5, where they all come back together. They've already said they're not going to introduce a bunch of new characters, or any new characters really, in season 5. We're going to get time jumps. We're going to have so much to wrap that this is the only time we get to see them by themselves. So I kind of appreciated that. I have a couple rapid fire questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rapid fire question number 1. D&D. You are a little, maybe a lot more educated now on D&D going into season 4 than you were in prior seasons, because you've been watching Critical Role and whatever. In this latest season, did you feel like the D&D elements and character types and all of that really like stood out to you and meant more and gave the story more depth? Or do you feel like that's just an artifact of where they chose to set the story?
Looking back on it, I haven't rewatched it since I started learning about D&D, but I just, from what I remember, I would say that season 1 probably had the most like archetypal D&D structure. It had the group being that party, kind of trying to figure out the problem, whatever. And then the next two seasons, I don't think had it as much. And while there's a lot that I wouldn't say fit the same like mold as season one, I would say that season four actually did a great job of kind of doing a lot of different parties running after different types of adventures. So you got to kind of see the different, like the different types. So like there's the California crew are very much like the Marshall guys they have no magical powers. They are running rampant, just trying to get to the problem before it becomes an even worse problem. And they're kind of like the comedy crew, just running around trying to get around. And then with say like the people in Hawking, so the older kids group especially, they were kind of almost like detectives, and so it was kind of more that type of story. And so I kind of saw elements of that, and I saw kind of how you could almost like put them in the different types of roles and character archetypes a little bit more this season than the past two seasons. Yes, I wouldn't necessarily say it felt overly D&D as compared to any other media, but I think with you knowing that it's implied that it's a lot of D&D, you can see it more.
I think for me, what stood out in terms of D&D elements in season 4 is that if you know the, D&D characters and what their like stats and types and whatever are, season 4 becomes an episode about like identity and finding your identity. And in doing so, they're revealing to you characters' classes. Some of the basically classes. Some of the characters are pretty obvious to like figure out. Like Hopper is a barbarian, meaning he does physical fighting and close range, and when he's raging, when he's grumpy, whatever, like he's even that kind of. He's the guy that walks up to the Demogorgon and grabs a sword, like he's that guy. But then you have these moments like when you had Will talking to Mike about like what he contributes. My cat is knocking over my camera, which is totally fine. When Will is talking to Mike about what he contributes, Will is like explaining to him basically that he has the characteristics of a paladin without saying he's a paladin. Steve is a rogue, so on and so forth. You have what was the other? Oh, I have a theory that Nancy is a halfling barbarian, which means she, like Hopper, likes to go into rage. And
I was about to say, like, because Nancy and Robin are my two favorites, and I was trying to think about Nancy. Yeah, Nancy would be like a halfling barbarian. Like, she would use some of the weirdest mechanics of a barbarian, but and like she's the most intelligent of barbarians for sure.
Because she had that whole thing where like she saws off the shotgun because she wants to fight at close range. She couldn't fist fight at close range, so she has to have a gun. But they specifically like even when they're throwing like Molotov cocktails and all this kind of stuff, they specifically show her not doing that. She's using a gun. She always has a gun.
She's Percy if Percy wasn't a fighter. If Percy was a barbarian.
Yeah. Carey, are we making you want to watch it yet? Listen, it's so much better than we're making it sound like.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. I know that this is a show that I would probably like to watch. I was just late to the Netflix game, and then of course it was like already into season 3 or whatever, and I just haven't because obviously I need to start at the beginning. So I've got a summer ahead of me. I'll probably do that, but I'm not gonna lie. D&D is not necessarily my thing. So hearing this conversation, I'm like,
D&D is like a background element of it that only comes up sometimes. What is really like a character in this is the 80s. The fact that this takes place in the 80s, the fact that this is like an 80s kids to young adult like escapade type of, I don't know, situation, and they are fighting monsters that would have been considered like geeky sci-fi monsters in the 80s. But one of the mechanisms they used to do that is like talking about D&D because they play D&D together. But it's a background character. You'll like it, just trust me. When have we ever steered you wrong? Often. Every time I recommend The Bachelorette. Okay, so let's talk about some of the high points here. And for me, one of the high points throughout the season was Max and Lucas. Now, we touched on Max and how, in my opinion, I thought she should have been up for an Emmy nom for her whole situation. But Max and Lucas really carried like the big pivotal whatever, like A-game moments this season. Did you have any other standout moments or standout characters?
I mean, I did already say that I loved Robin and Nancy this season. I
Yes.
liked the team up a lot. I liked how it went from like there's the tension of Nancy not knowing that her and Steve are just platonic, as well as like not understanding Nancy's like nervous energy. And by the end of even just that day, they're like best friends. They're in it together, and I thought that was amazing. And then I also like how my favorite scene was actually probably when Robin convinces the director to let them go see Victor Krum.
Yes. That was so good. That was so just like pulling out every like feminism,
just, like,
whatever line, but sheerly lying through her teeth. Incredible, amazing, 10 out of 10.
I mean, it was the best. It was the best show of like the nervous kid doing the best at social manipulation for their own goal, and then Nancy sitting there going, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Stop!" And they're just kind of going, "Oh, it worked." It was one of my favorite scenes because it was so funny.
They really do such good, brilliant representation for like nervous, neurotic, brilliant girls. And yet they are so different from each other. There's a whole spectrum. It's incredible.
Because they both have that like nervous, neurotic perfectionism type thing, but it comes out as the two different stereotypes of that, of like the geeky girl who doesn't like Robin is the geeky girl, she's in band, whatever, and then you have the it girl and she has to be perfect all the time, and it's a really interesting representation of how they're so different and so similar, and I really liked that dynamic.
I love that they don't make them just be like opposites for the sake of being opposites. I love that they don't have them fight, but then they don't like suddenly throw them together and make them like, oh, we're like best friends, we're in the room together. You know, like it's none of that. Like they're very reasonable in their friendship. And I like that they had both Robin and Nancy frequently in groups with the younger kids, and they didn't default to like having them be like maternal big sister whatever for the younger kids. They have frequently Steve be the one who's kind of shepherding the younger kids. He is something of a paternal figure, which is one of my little soapboxes, bones to pick, ditches to die in, whatever you want to call it. If I see one more person call Steve a mother online, I'm gonna lose my shit. With that being said, we have avoided talking about love triangles long enough. I suspect I know the answer. You have to pick one. You have to. You have to, Kate. You have.
I don't like either of them.
You have to. There's more than two options. No, and if you say Nancy with college or Nancy with a career or Nancy with whatever, I will throw your own words at you. She can have that and a significant other. So go ahead.
No. Yeah, I wasn't gonna pick the easy answer out or like college or whatever. No. In like the perfect world, it would be Nancy and Robin. However, in the world of possibilities that they're truly going to allow us, I guess Steve. I guess.
But we're not happy about it.
No, we're not happy about it.
We're kicking the rock the whole way down the street, but it must be.
Like, it was one of those things that when they first put her up with Jonathan, I was kind of like, I guess Jonathan, because we had season 1 Steve, and season 1 Steve isn't actually as bad as everybody says he was.
Disagree. Season 1 Steve can die, but go on.
That's fine. It's a long discussion. But he wasn't great. I will give you that. He wasn't perfect, but neither was Jonathan. Jonathan was stalking them with a camera and taking pictures of them.
In a loving, somewhat vampiric way.
No. But yeah, so
How
I didn't
old are
love.
the characters on this show?
How old are they? That's a great
Yeah.
question. So when we meet them in season 1, we have, well, across all seasons, there's always 3 tiers of ages. Okay, so there are the grown-ups, right? So you have Hopper, this grumpy sheriff guy. The guy who plays him, I think, is like 55 to 60 or something like that, and I'm assuming the character is supposed to be around that age as well. You have Joyce, who is the mother of 2 of the main characters, and she grew up with Hopper, so she should be around the same age. And you have other characters, like other parents who are that age or around that age, but Joyce and Hopper are like the 2 main adults. Then you have tier 2, which are like the older teens. So when we meet them in season 1, they're like the cool teens. And I think they're supposed to be like juniors. Are they
I think they're freshmen.
the
Was a
Nancy,
freshman,
Jonathan, Steve crew
I
or
think
freshmen in season 1?
Jonathan and Steve is a year or 2 older than them, but they're all like freshmen, sophomore in high school.
Gotcha. Okay, so they're high schoolers, but they're not older yet in season 1.
Yeah.
And then you have the younger crew. So if you see most of the time like posters and stuff of Stranger Things, like the youngest one's like 11 and so on, and they are supposed to be like young middle school or whatever at the time. They're supposed to be like 12, 13. But they've aged them up throughout these seasons. So now the youngest crew is in high school. The middle crew is like graduating or should have graduated, or they're super whatever. And then Joyce and Hopper are acting like the thought of marriage just now crossed their mind at their big age. So that's another girl I have to pick. But it's whatever. Who doesn't want a honeymoon in a jail in Russia?
No, the reason I asked is because the only thing I knew about Stranger Things was probably like the first season poster, and I see these young kids, right? And I know that was years ago, but I'm hearing like talking about like love triangles. I'm like, hold on, how old are these kids?
The younger kids, so the youngest kids, the ones that you're thinking
There's
of.
There's a love triangle in the kids too.
Is there? Who?
Mike.
Oh, Mike and Will and 11?
Yeah.
That's not a triangle. That's this.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. But it's the saddest, softest little love triangle. It's just sad.
There was like hints of a love triangle for like 3 seconds when Max was first introduced.
Yeah.
So in the kids, there's 2 main ships. The youngest kids, who are now like they're 18, but whatever. There's the main girl, 11. That's the girl with powers, and there's like this long-standing ship since season 1 of her and Mike. I love them. Literally pry them out of my cold, dead hands. So she is like powered, she's gifted, blah blah blah. Watch the whole show and you'll figure it out, but she's like gifted with a capital G, basically, right? And in her story, because she was not like raised in normal society, she was basically like raised in a lab until like the age of 12 or something like that. She comes across, even now, even like several seasons into it, they have her, she kind of talks in an awkward way, she holds eye contact in an awkward way, she is gifted, but doesn't necessarily like, not good at always like manipulation or whatever, that kind of thing. She is such an interesting, like, fleshed out character, and to see her consistently be loved, to see somebody consistently love her for her gifts, to love her because she is like his superhero, is so fantastic. It's done in a very sweet and gratifying way. It's not cheesy, it's not forced, it doesn't come across as an agenda. A lot of times when you see a character loved where you're like, oh, for example, if it was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm seeing like a nerdy girl or a smart girl or gifted girl or whatever we liked. Sometimes it's like, it's an agenda. Like somebody set out to write a story of like gifted girl finally gets some type of vibe. Like it doesn't carry that energy. It's so good. And there's not a love triangle around it yet, knock on wood. Somebody else likes Mike, but it's his best friend, Will, and Will has not come out of the closet and Mike is not interested. That's not a
Yeah.
love triangle. That's a sweet side aspect that is indicative of the time. So you pick Steve for Nancy. I'm still on the Nancy and Jonathan thing, but let me tell you, in season 1, I was real iffy about Mike and 11. I was like, they're too young. They can't have it. And then season 2, I was like, oh, hold on. They got me there. They got me to change my mind about a ship, which like literally never happens because I'm like stubborn and obnoxious. I started by liking Nancy and Jonathan. I went into this season literally saying, you can pry Nancy and Jonathan out of my cold, dead hands, and they did just that. Character assassination on Jonathan this season, immaculate. Devastating, but immaculate character assassination on an otherwise previously fantastically written character.
I will say I think that has to do a lot with actually behind the scenes stuff. The
Yeah.
actor had some like legal issues so I don't think he could be there as often. So that was part of the problem.
He got arrested for cocaine in London, you can say.
Yeah. I don't know what it was. So there you go. I guess that is a bit of art reflecting life then. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't like any of the romances. I'm sorry.
My problem is I like too many of them. Wait, are you trying to tell me you don't like Max and Lucas? That's literally.
I don't hate any.
Stop. Max and Lucas is so good.
I just don't care about any of them.
Stab me in the heart.
I am like comfortably indifferent about all of them. The only one that might like sort of mild like that was cute is Hopper and Joyce, and that is it.
Hopper and Joyce is just kind of cute. Like they're fantastic shit. They're more than just kind of love them.
I understand I'm wrong on this one, and I can accept it. I just cannot make
breaking news. Kate doesn't care about love anymore. She doesn't believe in it. I feel like all of the ships in this show are so good. I literally hated the ground Steve walked on for like seasons 1 and 2. And then they tried to get me like back around in season 3. I'm like, look at him like taking care of kids. Don't you care? And I'm like, no. But they like, you know, they wormed their little redemption arc for him. And then this season, it's not that I care about Steve. It's not that I care about Steve and Nancy. It's that they gave me Steve pining so desperately for Nancy, bottling it up inside, can't lay a finger on her, can't do anything but just pining out of his mind. And I'm a sucker for a guy pining in pain and miserable. What more can I ask for than a guy miserable, Kate? Anyways, so good. I think Nancy's going to die next season so that they can have both Steve and Jonathan be crushed, and then there'll be like this huge obnoxious discourse on whether that was like actually a good thing to do or whether it set feminism back 10 years. Can't wait. Carey, commercial break time. Talk to us about Thor before we dive into Only Murders in the Building. I will rotate you back up.
Thor was an interesting movie. I liked it a lot. It sort of, and I generally try to sort of stay away from like sort of like online or social media sort of like opinions about a movie because it generally doesn't affect how I feel about a movie. But it's amazing how sort of I guess disparate is the word I'm looking for in terms of people who love it and people who are sort of like, I could have gone without it, right? It had sort of the same sort of humor and the fun that if you like Thor Ragnarok, you would like the humor in this movie. And it had enough action in it to satisfy like people who were in it for that. My only criticism about the movie is, and I'm not one of those people who say a movie needs to be 3 hours, but at 2 hours, at the runtime that it had, there were probably a couple things that they sort of like sort of left on the floor, on the cutting room floor. I would have appreciated more time between Jane and Valkyrie, because they have a really good friendship, and it translated on screen. I would have loved to have more time to see how that friendship, got going. Um, One of the things that actually did really well, even if you saw the first Thor movie and you saw, quote unquote, the on-screen relationship between Thor and Jane, it didn't come across as like it felt like a relationship that sort of had to happen for the story, but it didn't happen because there was like this chemistry that happened. And the MCU is like notorious for like not portraying like relationships real well on screen, which is evidenced by the fact that after Thor, they basically dropped Jane and Thor from anything that they ever did. What they really did a good job of in this movie was sort of like show through flashbacks or whatever the case may be, but it showed how their relationship came about, and it felt honest and earnest, and it felt like they had good chemistry together. So you felt that, and it also was pretty natural in terms of why their relationship ended. So I certainly appreciated seeing that on screen, and it kind of just sort of made me lament the fact that it took us this long to sort of get to that point, right? But I thought that was really well done. Like I said, I just wished that Valkyrie and Jane had more time together. Natalie Portman, I don't know who was her personal trainer, who was handling like food that she ate and all that good stuff, man. But she looked really good in that role.
Drop the routine. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, she looked really good. And she's a great actress, so I dig her in everything that she does for the most part. And she brought it in this, whether it's just the acting or the action sequences. So it's for me, I give it high praise. It's actually probably like one of my favorite MCU movies, which is strange to me when I hear other people say that it was sort of meh, which takes me back to sort of like The Last Jedi. Love, love, love The Last Jedi, right?
Same.
There are people who hate it.
Yep.
And there are people who hate it. And I'm like, did you watch the same movie? And it seems like the people who don't like Thor Love and Thunder would not have liked Thor Ragnarok, because it's I don't want to say it's just a continuation of that, but basically they took that foundation and just took it a step further. And I don't know why people would not love this movie if they love Thor Ragnarok. So that's probably the biggest mystery to me. But long story short, fun movie. Probably could have been about maybe 20 minutes longer. Um, I like where they're taking Thor. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I like where they're taking Thor, and sort of like the end of the movie sort of sets up some really good things that they could do with the character and where it goes. So I had a good time watching it. I thought it was fun.
I think some people are just like against being entertained. You know how like we as a society elevate this idea of like struggle love or struggle work, whatever. I think some people elevate this idea of like struggle entertainment, where like if you didn't have to think and cry and rip your heart out and feel terrible for half the movie, it's not good. Like, I don't think that's the case. I think you can have movies like the Thor series, or frankly a lot of Marvel movies, where it really is more about entertainment and funny and enjoyment and not feeling terrible for 2.5 hours. So when I saw people like acting like they had just now figured out that like it was a comedy and like kind of dogging on it for that, it seemed like they're just trying to be the first to hate a popular thing. Like sometimes you can just enjoy things, you know?
Well, here's the other part of it. I mean, there were parts of it that had like Thor Ragnarok humor to it, which is fine. It might not be some people's taste, but it was the best romantic story that the MCU has told, at least as far as the movies, as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, this isn't a spoiler. If you're familiar with the character of Mighty Thor, you know essentially what that character is about and what she's dealing with. So, I mean, there was emotional aspects to it too. There was emotional impacts of it. There was romance. There was humor. There was action. I mean, I don't know what else you might be looking for in a film, but that's generally the four things I'm looking for. So I had fun watching it.
People are just looking for like another Avengers film. I feel like.
I will say this though. I guess the only, and it's not criticism, but in what Marvel is doing with their Phase 4, it might be fair to say, well, after Endgame, right? It's like, well, we need a little bit of time, sort of like getting our feet up under us and sort of figuring out where we want this Phase 4 to go. And if you want to be sort of critical of that, I can understand that. I don't know that. I mean, I don't know what you would have been expecting going to see Thor 4 if you were sort of expecting, like, hey, I need this thing to sort of help set the foundation where Phase 4 is going. It's just telling a really continuing story of a character that we should all love and care about right now. And that's sort of enough sometimes, right?
I agree. I'm excited to see it. Haven't yet. Did see Top Gun. It was propaganda, but it was entertaining propaganda. So, you get what you get.
Well, that was the first one too. So
You saw what now?
I said that was the first one too. So you know what you're getting when you go to watch it. So.
Yep, you're signing up for entertaining military propaganda from start to finish. So logos and everything, I hear. Okay. Well, Carey, we had Carey's commercial break. It was 10 out of 10, and it is now time for Kate's Corner. Kate's Corner, wherein I think we're going to get through some highs, some lows, and some truly questionable time travel and sexual decisions. So take it away.
Making him an emotionally distant douchebag was a necessary improvement, as well as the more generally accepted and acknowledged fact that it's a toxic relationship somehow made it less toxic. In this TED Talk, I, in a extremely short amount of time, read The Time Traveler's Wife, watched the television adaptation, and watched the movie adaptation. If anybody likes the movie adaptation, I know it's kind of a classic. I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but it is absolute garbage. The book was okay. It was a solid 2.5, 3 out of 5. Great concepts, interesting. Almost talks about the morality and concept of like meeting your wife when she's 6 and you're 38, and then she meets you and she's 20 and you're 28. Yeah.
I didn't know about that. It got so much worse.
Yeah. So the whole nose scrunching thing, yeah, that's kind of the whole icky about it. It's somehow more and less icky than you think it's going to be. Okay. The book doesn't really do a great job of acknowledging it. It's just kind of like he gets like uncomfortable about it every once in a while, and he'll like acknowledge like, I show up randomly outside of time and I don't come with clothes, so I'm a naked man that just shows up in front of this 6-year-old girl. And so like he acknowledges that it's weird, but that's about as far as it goes in the book. Was
this written by a man?
No, it's written by a woman.
Oh.
But there's no real discussion about how that warped her understanding of sexuality and physical and emotional intimacy. Of the show does, and the show does it by a slight change that I thought was going to be a big mistake, and it was the saving grace of the show. So in like the first chapter of the book, they go like, she meets him in the library where he works. She's 20, he's 28. She knows about him. He does not know about her at this point. This is before his time of meeting her, but she has grown up knowing him her entire life. Okay. So she kind of like drops this on him. He knows it's a possibility because he does already time travel. He just hasn't met her yet. So he believes her, and they go out on a date, whatever. Then they go back to his apartment, have sex, and she wakes up the next morning, and it becomes very clear that he actually still has a girlfriend. And in the book, she has the temperament of like, I can forgive him because I kind of came out of nowhere. He had no way of knowing. And when I read the book, I was glad that she didn't like go screaming and blaming him for like having a life before her. but I was like, that was still a weird way of presenting it. In the book, she does, or in the movie, or the show, she goes off on him. She's like, you have a girlfriend. Why would you say anything? And he kind of was like a douche about it. He kind of was like, I really just wanted to have sex with you. And because of that more rough start, they have places to go. They have upward momentum to establish. They have a better relationship too of acknowledging that she's not in love with the 28-year-old version of him. She fell in love with the man that would come and teach her French when she was a kid. And it's her realizing
she as a kid fell in love with the...
Yes. Yeah. It's still gross. I'm not saying it's not. But what... It's gross. Yes. But it's not a healthy relationship by any means. But the show does a much better job of explaining how that would do like terrible things to you psychologically. Like, it acknowledges that it's wrong, and it acknowledges that it messed them both up, because she falls in love with a man that only comes to fruition because of his relationship with her. And it's this weird, impossible cycle, proposing this question of like how we influence each other, and how it's only through the relationships that we have that we become the people that we are, and the people that we fall in love with. And in that aspect, it's a really good conversation about it, but it's still like ewy gross. Like, I don't know, how he took her virginity when she was 18 and he was 41. No. Yeah.
Immediate jail. Immediate jail.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's not, and when I first read it, it definitely proposes itself as a romance. But I did find an article where the author herself was like, I get frustrated when people read this as a romance. It's not a romance. I am not by any ways condoning the actions of these characters, but she was like proposing this question of how that would affect how they developed. And if she had done a better job of framing it as this is how that would influence each other, and the warped way that it would, if there was a more open conversation about that, it would have been so much better. The show does a really great job of doing that. There is some romantic elements in the show, but it is far more about she's kind of terrible to him because he's not who she thought he was. And he is consistently acknowledging, like, I wish that this wasn't happening, but I can't control where I go. So he kind of has no choice but to be in her orbit. And because of those circumstances, it's still gross, but it has a level of the inevitable influence that we have on people that we surround ourselves with. And it has a more like contextual conversation about it, instead of it just being, why? That's kind of gross. Mm-hmm. The show also changes a couple other really small details that I think would lend itself to a really interesting end if they had been renewed for season 2. They were not. I will forever be frustrated by this, because
what network was this on?
This was on HBO Max.
Oh, they can get away with this.
Yeah, like, it was nudity, but I mean, it was just him showing up in different times and then rushing to get clothes.
Okay.
That was it. I wish we could have gotten a second season, simply because I want to see how they would have fixed the other big problem of this story. In the last scene of season 1, you get a hint at what happens, but it becomes very emotionally manipulative and messy. And in the book, they do a lot of just like not even acknowledging that they're forgiving each other for really screwing each other over. Because essentially, like, she'll have sex with him when he's out of time, and there's a lot of implications with that, and they never really argue about it. They just accept it. And I'm like, yeah, it's you, but it's not really you. It's not the you that I'm married to. It's the you that was like 27 or 29 and like came, like, so I think the show could have done a much better job than the book did. It already did so far, and I just wish we could have gotten the full extent of that improvement and progress. But we will never get it, so
Rip.
rip.
Well, I feel like I just went on a time travel journey during the listening to the TED Talk, and it has made me more inclined to watch it than less inclined, despite knowing the nitty gritty. Go ahead, Carey.
I have two questions. So
Yes.
the second question is, I'm a sci-fi guy, right? So I'm just wondering, how in the world does he time travel? I know that's not a big deal probably for the show. I'm just wondering, how does he time
Yeah.
travel? And
It's the story is far more framed as a romance or as like a modern drama, but it's kind of blamed on his genetics, which in the second part of the story would have had farther, like it's kind of the focus of the second half is the more genetics and the genealogy of what would happen going forward. But we didn't really get that part into the show, and the book doesn't do a great job of explaining it and discussing it. And the moral implications of it all, but it's all genetics. He has some genetic anomaly that just slips him out of time, and he shows up in different places.
the other question was, and so when he first appears to her as like when she's a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is their relationship more of like a mentor kid, or is
Yeah.
what is that relationship like?
So from about when she's like 6 to 15, it is very much like a mentor, and until she's maybe 14 or 15, she doesn't really seem to even have a crush on him. It's very much like this weird man.
14 or 15? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, continue.
When she's younger, it's very much like this weird man who nobody else knows about shows up in my backyard, and he teaches me French. And then it develops more into she's starting to put pieces together of the story of his life that she has gotten from him. He's trying to be very secretive about it because he doesn't really want to tell her that they get married. He doesn't want her to know that he's her future. Because he's trying to avoid the inevitable corruption that their relationship has on her anyway.
He's trying to avoid the corruption.
He really does. It's actually more on her that fully, but the whole thing is messy. I can appreciate what he was trying to do, but I do wish it was a little less gross.
Bishop agrees.
Yeah. But yeah, Carey, it's far more of a mentor or even like a older brother, father figure for a while until it's not. Until he's willing to kill a man for her, and then she's like, "Ooh, that's hot." I'm like, "Okay, calm down."
But that's always my opening line at the bar. I'd kill that guy for you. It works every time.
Sure.
Does it? Well, speaking of killing people, the other thing we had on our little agenda for today was only murders in the building. Now, we don't have enough time to do it justice, given, we only have a couple minutes left, but neither of you are current, or are both of you current on it?
I'm current.
I am not.
Okay. I'll give one tiny little spiel. I really love how they have made the building even more of a character this season. There's all kinds of it's wild set magic, and you really have to suspend disbelief with where are these tunnels and chutes and all of this coming from. But the way they have this sort of building within a building situation, I think is fantastic, cheesy, perfect for the show. Love it.
Yeah, I agree. I will also just quickly add, I think I actually like this season even more than last season, which is wild, but it's so good. It's maybe a slight bit less funny. It's still funny, but it's maybe slightly less funny, and they've put in a lot of work to make me care about every character. And so episode 3 came out, and I was like, why would you do that? Why would you make me care about her? And then episode 4 was very sweet, very heartwarming.
Having his daughter Lucy show up, I thought was just so brilliant, because it gives all of the other characters this other layer. Obviously, it gives you a layer seeing him as a dad, but I also like seeing Mabel not be the young, cool whatever person, like showing, oh no, actually, she is at whatever she's supposed to be, late 20s, early whatever. And she does not know teen lingo, and she cannot just automatically connect with a teen. I thought that entire sequence was brilliant.
Yeah. The $200, please, was great. And then I really liked the end scene with her and Mabel, Lucy and Mabel, where Mabel's like kind of a big sister role in a way, where it was kind of like, I see a lot of similarities between the two of us that you could never guess. And my sage advice to you is to talk to him. And we very clearly will get more of Lucy based on the fact that she saw way more than she should have.
Right.
So I'm excited. I was worried I sometimes get really nervous when they bring in like Gen Z characters or whatever, because of how bad the lingo gets.
Yeah.
Because I know very few true Gen Z people that actually talk like that.
Right.
And it was bordering on getting that bad, but it was still like, she was still young enough, and she still had like enough like other personality traits than just being young to like support that she had a secret, and she was clearly there because she wanted to help, and she wants to like point him in a direction, and she clearly sees him as the best father she ever had, and she wants to reconnect, but she's nervous about doing so. So it kind of brushed over any issue I thought would possibly happen about them going bet and woo, and that was much better than it could have been. And I'm excited to see her again.
I do know an 18-year-old who uses all lowercase bet very frequently, so that one I did buy. There were 2 moments where I thought they had really good characterization of side characters in this episode, and both of them were somewhat nonverbal moments. When we see the glimpse of what's his name's son, and there's part speaking, part sign language. I thought that was really cool. Tie back to characters that we kind of dropped off on, abruptly, not unexpectedly, at the end of last season. And the moment where his son speaks as well verbally, I thought that frustration came through, and it was very well acted. The other nonverbal moment is when we see Lucy walking through the hotel in her, what I presume to be bridesmaid or whatever dress, with her Converse on, and she's carrying bags and all of that. Just seeing her walk through the hotel in this bizarre mishmash of this awful, roughly purple dress that obviously her mother picked out for her as a bridesmaid dress, and her own worn Converse and all this other, and the way that she walked and the lack of, grown-up poise, whatever, is very well done. That was a very good, like, introductory sequence to her. And this show does that a lot, where you see characters and, it's just because of Mabel's beats and yellow jacket and all of that we kind of get a feel for what this character is like. We got that with a couple more characters this season, so I appreciated it. Also, we're 2 minutes over time, and my cat is trying to destroy a paper bag loudly in the background.
Yeah, I totally agree about the introduction.
Well, I'm excited because in 2 weeks we will have a couple more episodes of Only Murders in the Building to chat about, amongst other things, such as a couple more weeks of The Bachelorette, which I didn't even bring up much tonight, guys. Are you proud of me? You're so welcome. We'll have that. We'll have watched Persuasion, which I'm so excited about. Even if it's terrible, I'm going to love it. Watch. So we'll have a lot to talk about in 2 weeks. And maybe Bishop will make less background noise. Until then, bye.
Bye.
Everybody's information is in the description down below. My name's Cammien